Hi, this is Patty with Nolan, and I'm going to walk you through our electronic payment solution for NetSuite. Electronic payments for NetSuite is designed to be able to mark your vendors in NetSuite as to be paid electronically, store their bank details on the vendor record, and employees as well. We can pay employee expense reports with this product. So we set up the vendors and employees to be paid electronically. We build a format or multiple formats if needed in your account that will be able to generate a file for your bank that's going to contain instructions for your bank to be able to make ACH or wire or check payments on your behalf. This product installs into NetSuite as a bundle. As you can see across the top, we have an electronic payments tab. So it's built right into NetSuite. So for users, it's going to look and feel like part of native NetSuite. It's going to be linked to NetSuite records. The only difference was that it was written by the Nolan development team. When we implement this product, we'll work with you and your bank to determine what types of payments you need to make electronically. The bank will dictate what type of file they need to receive and what information is required for each of the different payment methods that need to be in that file. Then the Nolan team will build those different formats into your NetSuite account. We'll set up your bank account details in NetSuite so that we know which account and what information the bank needs about your bank account in that file. We will also when we install the bundle, there will be a new tab on the employee and vendor records in NetSuite where you can store the vendor or employee bank details. So if we're going to be making ACH or wire payments, we need to see, or the bank needs to see the account number and routing number or the SWIFT and IBAN codes. So Nolan's bundle installs a new tab so that there's a place to store all those details. And we'll take a look at that in a second, but we can also add custom fields to store other details like required bank codes that we'll see in a second. Once the bundle is installed, the user doesn't have to do anything different to produce bill payments or enter bills in NetSuite. You're going to have a normal data entry process for entering new vendor bills. Those bills will inherit the setups from the vendor record. And then the only difference is when you go to pay bills, instead of using the out-of-the-box NetSuite pay bills, you would navigate to the screen that I'm showing here, the electronic bill payments, where you can make selections based on what bills are due through a certain cutoff or end date. We can change the amount. We can make other changes to the payments in this window. When we hit the Process Payments button, that's when the Nolan solution will go through and create bill payments in NetSuite and mark those bills as having been paid, and we'll produce the file at that point. The file that we produce then needs to be sent or uploaded to the bank, so we don't automatically send the file to the bank, but we do produce a file that contains all the exact requirements dictated by the bank, so that when you send that file over to the bank or upload it to the bank, that's going to contain all the exact instructions that your bank needs to process those payments on your behalf. Okay, so we'll actually, what we'll do first is we'll go take a look at some of the setups, and then we'll come back to this window and actually produce some payments. Okay. So the first thing that we will look at are the different bank payment definitions that are in this account. In a live implementation, we would work with you and your bank to determine what types of payments you want to make and what those different files need to look like according to the bank's specifications. So instead of a big list like I have here, you might only have 2 or 3 different formats. So if you want to, we probably have a separate format for check instructions for the bank. We could possibly combine wires and ACH. We may need a different format for international payments if we're making international payments out of a U.S. account. So in this list, you'd see maybe 2 or 3 different formats for your account. And if we go in and look at a format, all the work done to create these formats is done by the Nolan setup process, so the users won't have to get into all the details of the mapping exercise. This is done on your behalf as part of the implementation. You can see here the mapping tool has the ability to create header and footer records, remittance records. We can map in existing NetSuite fields out of the box. We can create custom fields that we can map in from the vendor record or even from the vendor bill. We can set up constant values. We can have formulas. So there's lots that we can do with this so that the tool is pretty powerful and is able, typically we're able to create a file mapping or a file format in to meet the requirements of the bank specification document. Okay, so this is all done as part of the Nolan implementation process. But once we've created those different formats in your account, then you'll see in a second where we can link these different formats to the individual vendors. Okay, so that's the first step, is we'll create those payment definitions. The next setup step we typically do is we'll create bank account records inside of NetSuite. And this is just a one-time setup where we're going to link your cash account that you want to make payments from, so your NetSuite GL cash account that you're going to make the payments from, we're going to link that to one or more file formats. So in this case, we're saying we're going to take our Wells Fargo Cash GL account and use it to make Wells Fargo ACH payments. So we can also store details that the bank needs in that file. So it might be your account number and routing number. It might be they have a different account ID that they use for electronic payments. We have the ability to store those fields on this record and submit those fields so that they appear in the output file for the bank. So we set up, we need to have, you can use the same format with multiple cash accounts. You can use the same cash account with multiple different formats. The one requirement is that we need to have a valid bank account file format combination type of payment that you're going to be making. So you can see that I can use the same Wells Fargo Cash GL account for multiple files, and I can use the same file format for multiple GL accounts. We just have to have those setup records exist so that we can choose them in our pay bills window. Another setup step is that we then need to set up some details on the vendor record. So if we come in here, I've created a filter to be able to see which vendors are assigned to which format on my Save Search. If we go in and look at one of these vendors, you'll see that the bundle that Nolan installs, it adds another tab to the vendor record, and that's the Bank Payments tab. So in here, we're able to store details that we're going to be able to map into that output file that we're sending to the bank. So typically the first thing we do is activate this vendor to be paid electronically by checking the Pay by EP box. Next, we need to select a bank payment definition or file format. So those are the maybe 2 or 3 different formats that we build into your account for, in this case, ACH or check or wire card payments now with Wells Fargo as well. You would make an assumption that this vendor, the majority of the time, you're going to pay them by ACH is what we're saying here. We do have the ability, we can make some of these fields available at the transaction level. So if typically we're set up to pay somebody by check, but you need to send them a wire to get it faster for maybe just one bill, we can have these fields available at the transaction level to make those one-time changes at the bill level. But here we're going to make some assumptions when we're setting up the vendors of how we're typically going to pay each vendor. And we'll choose that format. The account name is typically the vendor name. Sometimes though their bank might know them by a different name, so we can map in that account name. Email, we have a choice. It's a global setting of whether we use the standard vendor email or a specific remittance email. There's a setup option for which one we choose. After we produce the payments in NetSuite, we can kick off a Nolan process inside of NetSuite to have NetSuite go out and email your vendors that we just paid electronically, and that email will contain a NetSuite preferred remittance form to show what bills were included in that payment that we made. So we can choose whether we're mapping in the standard vendor email or a dedicated remittance email. There's other fields that we would check. So with some banks, like Wells Fargo and Chase, they require some additional codes to know in that output file what type of payment each one is. So if we are sending a batch of ACH transactions, then those are going to need different 3-digit codes than a batch of checks would. So we can have those values linked to the payment definition that we choose. So if we choose to switch them from ACH to check, then those different values that Wells Fargo in this example requires would need to change. Okay. We also can store, in this case, if we're sending an ACH batch, Wells Fargo in my example, and again, we're not limited to Wells Fargo, but that's what the sample data is referring to. We need to provide in that output file, if we're making an ACH payment for this vendor, we need to include this vendor's routing number and account number in that output file. If we were making international payments, instead of routing number and account number, we would need the BIC and IBAN. So we can have different fields available. So on this Bank Payments tab, we're going to determine what fields do your bank require and make those available to be entered, and we would only show the fields that your outputs are going to use, so we can organize it however makes sense to your users. If you've been using NetSuite for a while and you want to add Nolan electronic payments into your account, we can create a template of all your vendors, a saved search of all your vendors, including all the fields that Nolan's going to require for electronic payments, and we can create a template that we send to Excel where you can gather those details or populate them from another source, and then we can use NetSuite CSV tool to do a vendor update to update the records that Nolan's going to need in that output file. So we can help you set up those vendors to be paid electronically once we are in the implementation phase. Once we've made all these choices and activated this vendor to be paid electronically, anytime we create new bills for these active Nolan electronic payment vendors, those bills are going to inherit these default settings. So the pay by EP flag and the format definition in the Wells Fargo or the bank payment method codes are going to flow down to the individual transaction. And as I mentioned, if we need to, we can make those transaction level fields available so that they can change, like make a one-time change to a bill to say maybe instead of check, we want to do a wire this time. So you can see at the transaction level, we can make those fields available to be edited. Okay. All right, so once we've done the setup, we've created the formats, we created my bank account detail setups in NetSuite, we've set up our vendors to be paid electronically, and now I have some bills in there. So at this point, what we want to do is go ahead and make the payments. So we navigate to the Nolan Pay Bills screen. This sample company that I'm using is not a One World account, but if you did have a One World account, you'd pick the subsidiary first, and then after you pick the subsidiary, you'd pick the cash account, which is where I'm starting. Once you pick the cash account, then we have the ability to select the bank payment definition or the file format, which is that mapping that Nolan does as part of the implementation. So in this example, I'm going to choose my WACH format. That format's going to act as a filter. So what it's doing is because we assign that format to a couple of vendors and then we created some bills for those vendors, they inherited that format. So by selecting the bank payment definition, that shows me any bills that are assigned to that format that are currently open and currently open through this end date. So the end date acts as a cutoff where it's looking at the vendor bill due date to show me which transactions are open and available to be paid through that due date. This date here is going to be the date that we submit in the file that we're going to generate, and it's going to tell the bank what day we want the bank to execute these payments. So that's where that date's coming from. This window behaves as a typical pay bill screen, so it's assuming we want to pay everything, but if for some reason we wanted to take a payment or bill out of the batch, we could do that. We could also change the amount, so we could short pay a vendor if we need to. So typical options that you see in a pay bills window are available here. So we're going to go ahead and process payments. And in this example, I have it set up so it's assuming that we want to make one payment per vendor rather than one payment per bill. That is a setup option that we can configure, but typically when we're sending batches to the bank, most scenarios end up being one payment per vendor. Now that that's completed, there's a couple different things we can do. We can go look at the bill payments, we can kick off the email remittance process, and we can go ahead and take a look at the file. Now in this example, we produced a file for a Wells Fargo specification in an XML format. So when we're looking at this file, it's not going to make a lot of sense just reading it unless you're fairly technical. But this this file is going to contain all the exact instructions that Wells Fargo is going to need to be able to make these ACH payments on our behalf. Okay, so this is the file that needs to be submitted to the bank. Some banks, you may be able to have your IT team and the bank team work together to set up a transmission schedule. Other users will just log into their bank using the bank security and upload the file. Either way, what Nolan's providing is we produce that file that you see here. We're going to store that file in the NetSuite file cabinet. It's also going to get emailed to the user who kicked off that payment process. So there's a few places that we can get access to that file after it's been generated, but we don't automatically send it to the bank with the Nolan functionality. Let's take a look at email remittance next. So what we're doing in this process is we're opening up that file that we just produced. So when we set up the bank account, I don't think I called out this field, but there's a field where we can dictate what that file name is going to look like. Then each generation of that file is going to have a sequential number as part of the name. So we pull up that file that we just produced, we can see the payments that were in that file, and we can kick off our process to say, go ahead and email NetSuite, go send out the emails to these vendors using their email addresses. So NetSuite's going to kick off that email process. Once those emails have been completed, then that email is going to be stored in the communication history for each of those bill payments that we'll see in just a second. So we'll go ahead and kick off that process. We can also review the bill payments. Okay, so we can look at the bill payments, and we can see that when we process that file, process those payments, it produced that XML file that we looked at, but it also created the bill payments in NetSuite. So this is going to look just as if you'd cut a check out of the NetSuite Pay Bills window. So no different other than that Nolan produces rather than a user. We have an audit reference here so we can see which file this bill was paid in. We can also see which bills are part of this payment. And if we look on the communication tab, we should now see that there's an email. So we kicked off that email process, so now that bill payment in NetSuite has a communication record where we sent an attachment, which is your NetSuite preferred remittance form. Okay. So I have not modified my form very much, but this is a NetSuite form that you may already have modified in your system. The email will send out your preferred remittance form out of NetSuite. And essentially what we want it to say is this payment number is paying these two different bills from NetSuite, so that when the vendor sees a payment of $3,300, then they get this email, they know how to enter that in their system, which bills that was paying. Okay. All right. So one more thing that we can talk about. So we've reviewed the setups, we processed some payments, we sent out the email. So the next step, the file at some point is going to get transmitted over to the bank. Typically the bank will have some kind of acknowledgement process. If they come back and say that one of those transactions in that batch that you just sent over was rejected, then we have the ability to go in and select that batch, select that file, see the payments, and then be able to choose any individual payments in that batch that did get rejected by the bank. We can come in here and select one or more payments in the batch and hit the delete payments button. What that will do is it'll entirely delete the bill payment that was created, which has the effect of opening up those bills again so that you can go to that vendor record, change their account number if need be, or make any other necessary changes, and then those bills will be eligible to show up in your next bill payment run. So it's kind of a quick overview of the functionality for electronic payments. Please contact US NetSuite at nolanbusinesssolutions.com if you need additional information. Thanks.